But soon the prediction becomes unmaintainable. If you keep saying, yes, this really is coming around the corner, it's just around the corner, next 5 to 10 years this will happen, you can say this a couple of times, but after a while people will not take you seriously anymore. So when Weiser in 1990 said, oh, this is really going to happen, and right now we're in 2009, and this really hasn't happened yet in the way that he predicted, then it becomes more and more difficult to take him seriously, and you find more and more people like me and Paul Durisch who are trying to say, well, let's look at this a bit more rationally. So what we often find is this kind of life cycle in these theories of the future, these visions. A new one will inevitably take this one's place. It will become very popular. I'm thinking this might be the singularity in our case, which is basically a return to artificial intelligence idealism. What we'll also find is that the old one is soon forgotten. We all remember virtual reality, and we were all believing that that we would, in the 80s, we really believed that we would do this. This was going to happen. We were all going to live inside the screen, and we often forget how really we believed this. I mean, right now this looks funny, but this was dead serious back then. These visions of the future, they're not just debunked. I mean, they're really forgotten. And Vincent Moscow writes in his book, The Digital Sublime, how there is indeed a remarkable, almost willful historical amnesia about technology, particularly when the talk turns to communication and information technology. And so, because they often, according to him, they promise revolution. And this revolution aspect is so important because where in evolution, history really forms the basis of a new idea, of new connections and new technologies. Futurists often talk about revolution because that kind of wipes the slate clean so easily. You can forget about all the old stuff. The new future is going to be really awesome. This new thing is going to be great. So Bell and Durisch kind of sum it up as saying that the problems of ubiquitous computing essentially are framed as implementation issues that are someone else's problem, to be cleaned up afterwards as part of the broad march of technology. So I don't believe that we'll ever get to this ubiquitous computing idea of Weiser or anything related to that idea of computers being everywhere and helping us out in that level. But what if we could? What if we could create this global system and they would all work together and there wouldn't be 10 standards and it would all be great? Would we even want it? That's another big question, which I may find even more interesting. And this is kind of where things get a bit more political as well. According to Weiser, who recognized this himself, he says, the issue is about simplicity versus control. Later on, 10 years after his first prediction, he says, the problem, while often couched in terms of privacy, is really one of control. If the computational system is invisible as well as extensive, it becomes hard to know what is controlling what is connected to what, where information is flowing, how it is being used, what is broken versus what is working correctly, but unhelpfully, and what are the consequences of any given action, including simply walking into a room. Maintaining simplicity and control simultaneously is still one of the major open questions facing ubiquitous computing research. So here we find that Weiser's idea originally was to take care of this information overload by creating computers that will help us create a calm environment. In his most important paper, The Computer of the 21st Century. And here again, if you look back, you find this idea of the 21st century, a new era, forget the old stuff. He talks about computing environments becoming like a forest. You'll walk through it, and instead of it giving you the jitters and making you anxious and being too much information, it'll be calming and soothing. That's what he would like to have. But Billing and Cordingley in 2006, in one of their articles, said, what the risk here is that calm computing really turns into passive computing. And I'll go into that a bit. Like, designers often talk about making interfaces that feel natural. I'm sure I've talked to these designers. It has to feel natural. But, of course, interfaces are not at all natural. They're highly cultural. And if we don't teach users how to use interfaces, how to use computers, their own frame of reference for what is natural, their own ways of trying to understand what the designer meant by a certain menu button or something, or shrinks. So it's very important to keep users on their toes, to teach them new things, new interfaces, new ways of understanding of technology. You really have to push them. But this is really not the case in ubiquitous computing, where people are more about trying to create the ultimate usability environment, where if something has less buttons, that would be great. Like an iPod has less buttons, and that works well. Imagine if it had no buttons, then it would be perfect. So Lucy Sugman again says in her book, for practical purposes, user interface designers have long held the view that machines ideally should be self-explanatory, in the broad sense that their operation should be discoverable without extensive training, from information provided on or through the machine itself. On this view, the degree to which an artifact is self-explanatory is just the extent to which someone examining the artifact is able to reconstruct the designer's intentions regarding its use. So here we find this idea that if something should be natural, you need a smart user. But what ubiquitous computing tries to do is to dumb down users, to say, no, we're going to make it so easy, you really don't have to learn anything, it's going to be automatic, even though we already saw that was impossible. But that's the idea. And I think that's very dangerous to try to teach your users to be dumb, to not question technology, to not play with it. So it's very ironic, because in a way this is a reintroduction of this fear of information overload. But this time it's coming from the hackers and the nerds themselves. And they really also believe in a way in this information overload, and that users should be protected from this, even though hackers should know better. I mean, information is not something that is unsurmountable. You learn to live with it. For instance, Hilt and Turoff, in their research in 1985, did research into this about how people got used to technology, and they found that people really create filters quite quickly. For instance, in one of their cases, they were testing users of information systems and found that within 100 hours, no one was scared at all anymore. They were all fine, and basically it needs a little time, and then you're fine. Then we get to technological paternalism, which is an outcrop of this in a way. Spiekerman and Paulus in 2006 wrote about, in one of the articles about, they explain what paternalism is. They say, paternalism is a situation where there's someone who's being paternal and someone who's being paternal too. And they say the victim's freedoms are limited. The situation is perceived as authoritarian, but the victim believes this is better for his or herself. And the victim voluntarily undergoes this. So this is a situation where you believe, okay, so this technology is really complex, but I'll believe that the designers know best. And they say there's a new version which happens when technology becomes so widespread and ubiquitous, which there's a danger of technological paternalism, which is the same. The systems tell us what to do, and we believe that's better. But there's an extra level, which is that even the voluntary nature of it is taken away to a certain extent. For instance, Saab made some cars, test cars, where they put in these breathalyzers into the car. And the car would only start if you would first take an alcohol test. And of course, the idea is very noble, but of course it's very difficult to foresee situations in which you might be driving with your dad, and you might have had something to drink, but not too much, but a little bit of a limit, and you hit a car, something happens, and you're shit, I'm in the middle of nowhere, I need to get to the hospital, and your car won't let you. It's still perfectly fine. You could drive him to hospital if your car would let you, but your car won't let you. So these are situations where